Mom said she had no money to help me during my surgery. I remember the conversation clearly. Her voice was airy, dismissive, like she was discussing old shoes she no longer wanted. A few days later, as I scrolled through Instagram, there it was, a pristine white Bentley glimmering under the driveway lights. She posed in front of it wearing a smug smile, captioned, "Luxury is a necessity, not a privilege. Dream car, we deserve this." My heart pounded against my ribs. At first, I thought it had to be someone else's car, a friend's or maybe a rental. But no, in the background, I could see our family's old oak tree, the one I used to climb as a child. The photo was taken at my parents' mansion. That was the week I'd borrowed money from 3 different lenders for my Crohn's surgery. The same week she'd told me, "Sorry, Maya, we're strapped for cash right now." I felt a swirl of disbelief, sadness, and something darker, betrayal. My doctor had said delaying the operation could have permanent consequences, but my parents hadn't cared. They had plenty for themselves, just not for me. That realization was the spark that changed everything. Growing up, I lived in a sprawling house filled with marble floors and high ceilings. My parents, Vivian and Charles, loved to show off their wealth with grand gestures. Elaborate parties, exotic vacations, and fancy cars in the driveway. My older brother, Ethan, was the center of their universe. He was charming and bold, always knowing how to please them with a perfectly timed compliment or a witty remark. They showered Ethan with praise and seemed to indulge his every whim. Me? I was the afterthought. The child, they said, was independent enough to figure things out on her own. If Ethan wanted a car for his 16th birthday, he got it. When I turned 16, I received a pat on the back and a used laptop. Not that I was jealous. I wasn't. I had grown accustomed to making do without grand gifts or glowing accolades. What did sting was how my parents took their wealth for granted, as if there would always be more. They never considered saving for rainy days or future emergencies. Back then, I didn't realize how short-sighted they were. I just knew I needed to rely on myself because they certainly weren't looking out for me. From the outside, our family seemed perfect. 2 successful parents, 2 bright kids, and an endless supply of money. My friends envied me for the fancy house, the opulent furniture, and the designer clothes my mother wore. They'd ask, "Don't you love living like a princess?" And I'd nod politely, not wanting to reveal the uneasy truth beneath the gold-plated surface. Inside, there was a constant tension, an unspoken hierarchy where Ethan's needs came first. If I mentioned an interest in music or art, my father would suggest something more practical. My mother simply dismissed me with a wave of her manicured hand. They believed that since I seemed quiet and hardworking, I didn't need them as much. Ethan, on the other hand, needed support. So of course, he got the best schools, the best tutors, and the best opportunities. I remember feeling invisible whenever they fussed over Ethan's achievements. Like no matter what I did, it would never measure up to the child they considered their crown jewel. Still, I swallowed my feelings. I focused on my studies, determined to make my own path. At times, I doubted them, but a small part of me always hoped they'd come through in a real crisis. College was my ticket to independence. I worked relentlessly to earn scholarships and was thrilled to escape the stifling atmosphere at home. My chosen major was finance, a field that fascinated me. Numbers were reliable, unchanging, and unlike people, they made sense. I spent late nights in the library, balancing my courses with a part-time job at the campus bookstore. My parents rarely checked in, content to trust I was fine. Occasionally, I'd see a social media post of them at a yacht party or a luxurious resort. Ethan would appear in the background, enjoying the spoils of a family that seemed to have bottomless pockets. The contrast between their world and mine was stark. While they sailed through glitz and glamour, I was living on ramen noodles and energy drinks during finals. Yet a part of me was proud. I was forging my own way. If I succeeded, it would be through my own merit. I might not have the comfort of a safety net, but I had something more valuable: determination. My professors saw it, my friends saw it. I just wished at times that my parents would look my way and notice how hard I was trying. It was during my junior year that I first felt a strange, gnawing pain in my abdomen. At first, I wrote it off as stress-related cramps or maybe a bad reaction to cafeteria food. But the pain persisted and grew more severe. By mid-semester, I found myself in the campus clinic far too often. The nurse suggested I see a specialist, concerned there was an underlying issue. After a series of tests, I got the diagnosis: Crohn's disease. I'll never forget the doctor's gentle tone as she explained the chronic nature of it and the complications that could arise if left untreated. My mind spiraled with questions. How would I manage this while juggling classes and work? Could I afford the medications? Would I need a special diet? When I mustered the courage to share the news with my parents, I expected at least a semblance of worry. Mom's response was a dismissive, "Oh, that's unfortunate, but you'll be fine." Dad chipped in with, "You've always been strong, Maya." That was it. No follow-up, no offers of support. They went on with their lives as if my diagnosis was just a minor inconvenience they could file away. The real crisis struck soon after. My doctor informed me I needed surgery, immediately. The tests showed significant inflammation that could lead to serious complications if not dealt with. I was stunned. Surgery? That word alone rattled me. But the scariest part wasn't just the procedure, it was the cost. I was a college student living off part-time wages. My scholarships covered tuition, not major health emergencies. Panic set in. I tried not to let it overwhelm me, but the looming medical bills kept me awake at night. My roommates found me restless, pacing the apartment as I crunched numbers and possible outcomes. Finally, I decided to call my parents, convinced they'd recognize the urgency. "Mom, Dad, I need help." I started, my voice shaking. "They say I need surgery for my Crohn's. It's serious, I can't do this alone." I swallowed the knot in my throat, waiting for reassurance. Instead, Mom sighed dramatically, as if I'd just asked her to cancel a spa day. "Maya, sweetie, things are tight right now. We're not as flush as we used to be." Dad's tone was even colder. "You'll figure it out, Maya. You're independent, right?" That night, I cried until my eyes burned. I considered every possible route: medical loans, payment plans, asking friends, even launching a fundraiser. But time was pressing. Delaying the surgery too long could jeopardize my health in ways that might be irreversible. So, I scrambled. I worked extra shifts wherever I could, tutoring, waitressing, even taking on odd jobs like data entry for local businesses. It was exhausting. I'd spend my days in class, my evenings tutoring, and my weekends juggling multiple short-term gigs. My bank account began filling slowly, each deposit a small lifeline. I also set up a payment plan with the hospital, negotiating monthly installments. The people at the finance office were kinder to me than my own family, offering me workable solutions and emotional support. Friends pitched in too. Some donated small amounts, others offered rides or moral support. My roommate gave me the bigger bedroom because she knew I'd need privacy for recovery. These acts of kindness came from people who owed me nothing, yet they were there, while my parents were absent. Their generosity brought a strange mix of gratitude and anger. Why couldn't my own family show even a fraction of this care? By the time the surgery date arrived, I was both terrified and relieved. Terrified because any operation has risks, especially one involving a condition as complicated as Crohn's. Relieved because I'd finally gathered enough funds to at least get on the hospital's schedule. My medical team assured me everything would go smoothly, but the fear in my gut refused to subside. On the morning of the procedure, I sat alone in the hospital waiting room. I signed forms, answered last-minute questions, and listened to the beep of machines preparing for my care. I should have had my parents there, holding my hand, or at least offering a reassuring smile. Instead, I had a close friend, Kelsey, who skipped work to be with me. She handed me a soft blanket and told me jokes to lighten my mood. As the anesthesiologist administered the sedation, I fought back tears. I wasn't crying because of the pain or fear. I was crying because it hit me that if my parents wouldn't be here now, at this life-changing moment, they never truly would be. I closed my eyes, letting the medication lull me into unconsciousness, my heartbreak mixing with a sliver of resolve. Recovery was grueling. I woke up in a fog of discomfort and tubes, my body stitched and sore. Each breath felt like I was dragging air through shards of glass. The nurses were kind, adjusting my IV and checking my vitals. Kelsey sat by my bedside, reading magazines and fluffing my pillows. During those first days, I realized how kindness from near strangers could outweigh the neglect of so-called loved ones. Between painkillers and brief naps, I scrolled through social media on my phone, mindless distraction to keep me sane. That's when I saw it. My mother, Vivian, perched elegantly on the hood of a gleaming new Bentley. The caption read, "Luxury is a necessity, not a privilege. Dream car, we deserve this." My father stood in the background, champagne flute in hand. Ethan commented below, praising how stunning they looked. My vision blurred. The timestamp on the post was from the same week I'd begged them for financial help. My mind ricocheted from fury to grief to numb disbelief. Here I was, strapped to a hospital bed, thousands in debt, while my parents toasted themselves over a car that cost more than my entire medical bill. In that moment, any last illusion I had was shattered. Discharged from the hospital, I returned to classes on a strict schedule of meds and checkups. My professors granted me leniency, allowing extensions on assignments. The physical healing would take time, but something else had changed fundamentally. My heart hardened. I no longer held any expectation for my parents' love or support. That final blow, seeing their frivolous purchase, was my wake-up call. Determined not to drown in bitterness, I redirected my anger into productivity. I decided I'd focus on graduating with top honors and securing a high-paying job. I wouldn't just survive. I'd thrive on my own terms. If my parents had given up on me, then fine. I had no place for them in my life either. Every so often I'd get a text from Ethan asking how I was doing, mostly out of a sense of polite duty. Sometimes my mother sent me pictures of her new dresses or their staycations at 5-star hotels, never once asking how I was recovering. It was almost comical, like they lived in a completely different reality where my surgery was a minor footnote. I made a promise to myself. I would never again ask them for a single cent or an ounce of help. Graduation day arrived with fanfare and caps tossed into the air. I walked across the stage, ignoring the absence of my parents in the audience. Kelsey cheered the loudest, waving a homemade sign with my name in glittery letters. Other friends, mentors, and even some professors congratulated me, remarking on my resilience. It felt surreal. I'd navigated a major health crisis, financed my own surgery, and still managed to graduate near the top of my class. As I held my diploma, tears welled up. Not from sadness, but from a heady mix of relief and pride. I'd done it. I'd proven I could stand on my own. My parents didn't bother sending any graduation gift or even a congratulatory call. Ethan texted me a generic, "Congrats, sis." I thanked him politely, but we both knew our family dynamic was irrevocably altered. I turned off my phone, refusing to let their indifference overshadow this day. Later that evening, I sat in my almost empty dorm room, boxes piled around me, ready for my next chapter. I didn't feel lonely. I felt strong. My future was wide open, and for the first time, I believed I had the power to shape it exactly how I wanted. I moved to a bustling city to start a position at a prestigious finance firm. The job was intense, long hours, high stakes, but I thrived on the challenge. My mentors recognized my determination and quickly gave me more responsibilities. Being the new hire, I had to prove myself daily, running financial analyses, preparing reports, and learning the ropes of high-level client interactions. Outside of work, I still battled fatigue from my recovery. Managing Crohn's wasn't easy. Stress often triggered flare-ups. But I had decent health insurance now, and I followed my doctor's advice religiously. Each monthly paycheck reminded me of how far I'd come from scraping pennies together for surgery. I'd build my own safety net, bit by bit. My parents continued living their lavish lifestyle, at least, that's what it looked like from social media. My mother posted photos of fancy brunches and spa trips. My father showed off his business ventures, though I suspected they were more for show than profit. I rarely engaged with those posts. Occasionally, I'd see comments from old family friends praising them. It stung, knowing the reality behind that facade. But I pushed those feelings aside. I was forging a new path, one that didn't include them. The years began to blend into a steady routine of work, medical checkups, and personal growth. I climbed the ranks at my firm faster than expected, earning promotions for my unwavering commitment and performance. My name started circulating among influential people in the finance industry. It felt good to be recognized for my abilities, rather than dismissed as the lesser child. During this period, I saved aggressively. Memories of being abandoned during my health crisis had left a deep imprint. I wanted to ensure I'd never be at anyone else's mercy again. I invested carefully, studied the markets, and let my money work for me. The satisfaction of watching my accounts grow was exhilarating. At nights, I sometimes dreamed about my past, glimpses of the mansion, echoes of my parents' dismissive tones, but I always woke up resolute. Those memories wouldn't control me anymore. I promised myself that if I ever had a family of my own, I'd treat them with the love and care I never received. But for now, my focus was on building something unbreakable: my financial stability and emotional independence. Nothing was going to stop me from rising, least of all the ghost of my parents' neglect. Around my 5th year at the firm, rumors started circulating that my parents' fortune was dwindling. Whispers from old acquaintances reached me. Charles's risky investments had soured, and Vivian's extravagant spending was draining whatever remained of their funds. I scrolled their social media pages, noticing fewer flashy posts, fewer luxurious life captions. The once frequent images of weekend getaways and opulent dinners vanished. It was hard not to feel a flicker of schadenfreude. These were the people who couldn't spare a dime for my life-saving surgery. Yet a small part of me felt pity. They had created such a fragile world for themselves, built on vanity and illusions. Was I supposed to feel empathy now that the house of cards was tumbling down? I wrestled with conflicting emotions. Growing up, part of me had always yearned for their attention. Even though I no longer wanted validation, I didn't revel in their downfall. I took a step back and reminded myself, it's not my job to rescue them. They had made their choices, and now they had to face the consequences. My life had taken me so far that their self-imposed chaos felt like a distant echo. One morning, as I was analyzing quarterly reports in my high-rise office, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I'd let unknown calls go to voicemail, but instinct nudged me to answer. I lifted the receiver, and my mother's frantic voice filled my ear. "Maya, oh, thank God you picked up," she said, her tone tinged with desperation. Immediately, my heart pounded. I hadn't heard that voice in ages, and certainly not in that pleading tone. "We're in a bit of a bind," she continued. "Your father's investments, they didn't pan out. We might lose the house." I sat silent, letting her words hang. Part of me wanted to laugh. Lose which house? The mansion they'd always flaunted? Or the vacation home they'd bragged about? Still, I asked politely, "What do you expect from me, Mom?" Her breath caught. "We need money, just to hold us over until things stabilize. We're family." Family. That word stung. Where had their familial concern been when I was begging for my medical bills? Something in me hardened further. I calmly replied, "I'm sorry to hear that, but I can't help you," and hung up. My hands trembled, but I refused to doubt my decision. The calls multiplied in the days that followed. My mother tried repeatedly, leaving voicemails detailing their dire situation. Creditors knocking, assets being seized, utilities on the verge of disconnection. She sounded panicked, not the glamorous woman sipping champagne in front of a Bentley anymore. My father chimed in too, with short messages that sounded more annoyed than regretful, as if my refusal was an inconvenience. Ethan also reached out, brief texts asking if I was free to talk. We'd never been close, but his messages carried a sense of urgency. Against my better judgment, I picked up when he called one evening. He sounded subdued, explaining that our parents were at their wits' end. Their once endless funds had dried up, and they were desperate to maintain their lifestyle or at least pay off some debts. He asked me to come see them, to talk it out, to see if we could save the family. I couldn't help but recall the times I'd asked for a shred of support and got nothing. I told Ethan, quietly yet firmly, that I had moved on. I had no intention of saving people who'd left me to fend for myself at my most vulnerable. I ended the call and blocked his number too. An unsettling calm washed over me after severing those ties. My days continued with meetings, portfolio reviews, and client consultations. I found myself working with an intensity that astounded even my colleagues. Perhaps burying myself in work was my way of processing the tangled web of emotions that came from shutting out my own flesh and blood. Yet, at night, echoes of guilt gnawed at the edges of my mind. I questioned whether I was doing the right thing. They were still my parents, after all. But then I remembered. They'd chosen to buy a Bentley instead of helping me afford life-saving surgery. They had feigned financial struggles when I was in a hospital bed. Now that they really were struggling, was it suddenly my obligation to rescue them? I rationalized my stance. Years of neglect and betrayal had shaped this moment. I owed them nothing. Gradually, the guilt gave way to a peaceful acceptance. I could acknowledge their plight without being responsible for it. I started sleeping better, my mind made up. This was my boundary, and I had every right to keep it in place. A few months later, I received a formal letter in the mail. It bore a law firm's emblem, and my stomach clenched when I recognized my father's signature inside. The letter demanded financial assistance, citing a moral and familial obligation. They hinted at possible legal action, though I suspected they had no real case. It was intimidation, pure and simple. I contacted my own attorney, a close friend from college. He told me not to worry, my parents couldn't force me to pay their debts. Legally, I was off the hook. Emotionally, though, the letter dredged up old hurts. It stung that they'd resort to threatening me, instead of humbly admitting wrongdoing or apologizing. After ensuring there was no legal merit to their claims, I tore the letter into pieces. With every rip, I released more anger and resentment. They had chosen their path long ago. Their downfall was the result of their own arrogance and reckless spending. No matter how they tried to twist it, I wasn't the villain here. The irony was glaring. The very people who once told me, "You'll figure it out," were now demanding I save them from the mess they'd created. Work became a sanctuary. I poured my energy into new projects and continued climbing the corporate ladder. Within another year, I reached a high-level executive position, something many people spend decades aiming for. My salary soared, and my responsibilities grew. But with each success, I never forgot where I'd come from, nor the lessons my parents had inadvertently taught me. I maintained a modest but comfortable lifestyle. I found a sleek condo in the city, close to the office, with large windows overlooking the skyline. It wasn't a mansion, and I didn't drive a Bentley. I preferred reliability and practicality, words my parents had never quite embraced. I saw no need for flashy displays. My wealth was something I guarded, investing intelligently, ensuring I'd never be caught in financial peril. Sometimes, acquaintances from the past reached out, amazed by my achievements. They asked if my parents' money had helped me get here, and I laughed to myself. If only they knew how much I'd scraped by without them. I never publicly humiliated my family, though. I simply stated the truth. I built my career on my own. No handouts, no trust fund, no illusions. Inevitably, rumors of my success trickled back to my parents. My mother tried to contact me again, this time without threats. In a trembling voice, she said, "Maya, we just want to talk, to reconcile." Part of me wondered if this was genuine remorse or another ploy to latch onto my financial stability. Still, curiosity nudged me to meet them. I chose a public cafe, a casual place where we could talk without grand pretenses. When they arrived, I barely recognized them. My mother's once expensive outfits looked dated and worn, her face etched with worry lines. My father seemed exhausted, shoulders slumped as though carrying the weight of regret. They stumbled through half apologies, referencing how they didn't realize the seriousness of my condition back then. My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue, claiming she wished things had been different. But the subtext was obvious. They were struggling, and I was thriving. My father even tried to flatter me, calling me brilliant, as if he'd just discovered it. I listened politely, but I remained guarded. Their words felt too little, too late. I nodded, said I hoped they would find a way through their troubles, and left without offering a single cent. In the weeks following that meeting, I felt a hollow ache. A part of me longed for the sort of loving parental relationship I saw in other families, people who gathered on holidays, who supported each other through hard times. But I had to remind myself that love and support were never part of our family dynamic. Even at their most desperate, my parents struggled to show true remorse, still clinging to the idea that I owed them for raising me. I sought comfort in therapy, hoping to untangle the mixed feelings. My therapist suggested setting boundaries didn't make me cruel. It made me responsible for my own well-being. I was allowed to protect myself from toxic relationships. The concept seemed obvious, yet I needed to hear it from a professional to feel validated. Slowly, I began to accept that my parents and I would never share the deep bond I'd once yearned for. Instead, I had chosen a path that offered me peace and autonomy. My story wasn't one of perfect reconciliation, but of learning self-worth despite family dysfunction. It wasn't the fairy tale ending many people crave, yet it felt authentic. And authenticity was a currency my parents had never truly valued. I continued flourishing in my career. Every project I led brought in significant returns for the firm. Colleagues admired me for my poise and leadership. Some even confided that they wished they had my composure under stress. They had no idea that my calm exterior was forged in the fire of family betrayal and personal resilience. With my rising profile, I started getting invitations to speak at conferences and mentor younger professionals, particularly those from underprivileged backgrounds. I saw echoes of my own journey in them, especially those who lacked familial support. Mentoring became more than a professional activity. It was a personal mission. If I could spare just one person from feeling alone in a critical moment, I considered that a victory. My parents' occasional attempts to re-enter my life became background noise. They texted me holiday greetings, sometimes asked if I was dating anyone, as if pretending everything was normal. I kept my replies brief and courteous. Over time, their messages dwindled, likely because they realized I wouldn't be swooping in to bail them out. A quiet sense of relief settled over me. I'd found my place in the world, and it didn't revolve around their approval anymore. Time marched on, and I transformed from a rising star to a seasoned leader in my field. I bought a homey cottage on the outskirts of the city, a place with a garden where I could plant flowers and watch them bloom. On weekends, I'd stroll through the local farmers market, savor a cup of tea at a nearby cafe, and breathe in the life I had built. Calm, independent, and genuinely content. One afternoon, out of sheer curiosity, I checked my mother's Instagram. The once constant stream of luxury and bragging had shifted. Instead of posting about lavish trips, she shared simple photos, a homemade meal, a walk in a park. The Bentley was nowhere in sight, replaced by pictures of a modest sedan. A twinge of empathy rose in me. They'd lost almost everything, from their mansion to their pride. I briefly considered reaching out, but stopped myself. They never reached out of pure kindness or love. Their pattern was always about what they could gain. Knowing that, I closed the app. The ache in my chest was softer than before. I whispered a silent wish for them, that maybe this humility would lead them to something resembling genuine peace. Ethan's call came unexpectedly late one night. It had been months since I last heard from him. I debated ignoring it, but a nagging sense told me to pick up. His voice trembled with raw emotion. "Maya," he said, "Dad's in the hospital. Heart issues. It's bad." My heart clenched. Despite everything, the thought of losing a parent stirred memories I'd tried to bury. The times Dad taught me to ride a bike, the few moments he bragged about my grades. I told Ethan I was sorry to hear it. He asked if I'd come to see him, adding that Mom was barely holding it together. A swirl of conflict washed over me. Did I owe them a hospital visit? Would it bring me closure or reopen old wounds? Ultimately, I decided to go. Not for them, but for me, to ensure I had no lingering regrets. I walked into that sterile hospital room, the scent of antiseptic stinging my nostrils. Dad lay there, tubes in his arms, looking frail and disoriented. Mom stood by his bed, eyes puffy from tears. For a moment, the sight was almost enough to break me. But then I remembered all the times I'd been the one in a hospital bed, and they hadn't been there. I approached with measured steps. Mom glanced up, relief momentarily brightening her weary face. Dad opened his eyes, whispered my name, and managed a weak smile. In that silence, the weight of our fractured history pressed down on all of us. I said simply, "I'm here." I didn't say, "I forgive you," or "I love you." I didn't feel those words would be honest. I was just there. He mustered a quiet apology. "We should have been there for you," he said, voice cracking. Mom stood by, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. Maybe they finally grasped what their neglect had cost us. I nodded but said nothing. Sometimes silence conveys more than words ever could. We stayed like that, the quiet enveloping us, acknowledging a truth we couldn't unsay. They had chosen their luxuries over my well-being, and the damage was done. The next day I left. I wished them peace, but I did not offer anything more. Driving back, I remembered the image of Mom with her Bentley, How that single snapshot made the final cut in my heart. Now they had nothing, and I had everything I'd fought for: health, success, and peace of mind. My life was my own, unburdened by guilt or resentment. And that, I realized, was the sweetest luxury I'd ever know.